During the Middle Ages, books were written out by hand, mostly in monasteries. Often the monks would spend years on a work. Then, in 1450, an invention changed the world. In the German city of Mainz, Johannes Gutenberg invented the technique of printing with movable type. This made it possible to duplicate books in large numbers and at relatively low cost. The technological foundation was laid for the intellectual, political and religious changes of the succeeding centuries.
Have you ever wondered if there's a difference between hard copy books and ebooks in terms of how they influence our culture and our brains? Interestingly, in the past century, there has been a significant progression from the traditional form of reading from physical pages to reading from a screen, and even to reading books and articles off the internet, which in itself is a form of an extension of the ebook. There are many things to consider when it comes to comparing older traditional books that have been around for hundreds of years to those of the technological generation, and most importantly, the ways in which the technological progression of this particular medium has influenced our culture. First, it is important to understand the history of hard copy books and how it first came about in the world. The very first form of distribution of reading material came about from the printing press in the early 15th century. It was vital in playing the role of revolutionizing the distribution of materials across the world, and in progressing towards an even more modern society in which information could be more easily distributed and perceived by society. The invention initially echoed through several cities in Europe throughout many years, and became a vital part of distributing information amongst Western society. It also played an important role in creating several copies of the same material, as well as lowering the costs of books. In the long run, it also made information available to people across several cities in Europe. In addition to this, libraries were able to hold more books and for a cheaper cost as well. At the time, especially in terms of mass distribution of information, the printing press was definitely one of the most important advances of technology at the time, and influenced Western European culture significantly. Because of this invention, Western Europe now had an easier access to reading material, and for a cheaper price. In addition, the access to printed material also stimulated the literacy of people who wouldn't normally have the access to reading material, and this resulted in a lasting impact on their lives. At the time, books were written on subjects like religion, commerce, as well as medical and practical travel manuals, which came in handy to people with all sorts of different interests. Now, by examining how the printing press revolutionized the ways in which Western society perceives information, we can begin to look at newer developments, like the ebook, and how a digital form of reading has changed how our culture perceives information. And even so, why some people still choose to read printed hard copy material as opposed to ebooks. The idea for the e-reader first came about in 1949 and was proposed by a woman named Angela Ruiz Robles, then officially invented around 1971 by a man named Michael Hart. It is important in relation to Western culture because it changed and revolutionized the way that we read. Similarly to the important role of the printing press in distributing mass reading materials to many people at once, the ebook functions in a similar way, but even more so. The ebook allows for a very fast and easy accessibility to anyone with a tablet, and deters from the traditional style of reading from paper. This allows for greater portability of hundreds of books at once, as well as the possibility to switch between reading and performing other tasks on the tablet. First, what is an ebook and how does it work? An ebook, which stands for an electronic book, is a digitized publication tool that consists of both image and text. It comes in tablet form and is readable on the flat panel display of computers and other devices. Essentially, it is an electronic form of a printed book. In addition to the concept of e-readers, there are several different types. For example, Kindle, Nook, and iPad, which also carries all of these reading platforms. All of these readers come in different sizes and different screen preferences and at different prices as well. So, how has the ebook enhanced the reading experience in Western culture? The accessibility to an ebook can allow people to carry as many books as they want for a cheaper price. Hard copy books often cost more, whereas ebooks will cost way less simply for the reason for not being physical, and for not having color and ink added to them, for not having those pages that cost more money to make. In addition to the element of pricing on physical books and e-readers, there's also the concept of multitasking with one and the other to consider. In a digital age, our culture is used to having the accessibility to flip from one tab to another on a computer, and one application to another on other electronic devices while reading. Specifically, in the millennial demographic, it is quite common to be reading an article online, for example, and then switch to checking Facebook, and then go online shopping, and so on in a cycle. The brain of our generation is gradually becoming wired to multitask, and in this sense, reading off of an iPad, for example, is a great way to allow the flexibility and accessibility to multitasking. But this can also make monotasking and reading from a hard copy book slightly more challenging. Although in a sense, it may be easier to read off of an e-reader while handling physical tasks like eating or holding a drink, because all that is required to flip a page is to scroll down, it can ultimately be more difficult to concentrate on the sole task of reading, because your brain will want to switch to doing something else the minute it gets bored. Although the younger generation may find it more difficult to monotask and focus on a piece of reading material that is in front of them for an extended period of time, older generations are likely to not have the aspect of easy accessibility to other applications affect them, simply because they're not as familiar with iPad or iPhone applications as much as the younger generation is. Even some millennials still prefer reading from physical pages because it allows them to concentrate better on the material that they are reading. So, I asked a Queen's student what his opinion was in terms of the difference between reading from physical pages and reading from electronic devices.
Okay. Hi, my name is Oliver. I know I personally much prefer to read anything in hard copy. I find it just like a lot easier for my eyes to look at. I find like I literally get a much better understanding of whatever content there is, and the text that I'm reading, if I'm reading it physically on paper. That's why, for example, I always print off my assignments before I edit them. I still read newspapers. I read online textbooks. I always prefer to read anything in hard copy paper, even if that's not as good for the environment. So yeah.
To be more specific about the popularity of e-readers and their influence on Western culture, according to Amazon's analytics on ebook sales in 2012, there was a significant increase in the number of ebooks sold in the US Kindle store, and a drop in the sales of hard copy books. In this way, it is clear that ebooks have revolutionized the distribution of reading material and shaped Western culture to switch from the traditional form of reading to a digitized form. This reading technology plays an important role in shaping culture and the ways in which we perceive information. E-readers have made it easier and cheaper for a majority of people to access reading material at any given time and anywhere. The concept of easy accessibility to reading material has embedded itself in Western culture and contributed to the generation of the rise of technology and shaped the lives of many people today. The ebook is undoubtedly an important and significant step in terms of how the Western culture perceives information, and Western culture is equally important in shaping the ways in which ebooks function. For example, in addition to having e-readers with only the function of reading, other e-reading devices like iPads, iPhones, and computers allow for more than just reading. They also function as communicative devices, which takes reading another step further. Amongst a culture that is gradually becoming more influenced by digital technology and communicative devices, it is likely that reading will become even cheaper and more accessible in the future, with the development of newer technology and applications that are accessible to everyone.